Victor Carter was a billionaire health tycoon, known for his sharp business acumen and passion for improving public health. He was always seen at conferences, leading talks about health innovations and investing in groundbreaking projects. However, despite his wealth and success, his personal life had always been a bit of a mystery to the public. He'd often been described as a workaholic, someone who placed all his energy into his career, leaving little room for relationships or family. But there was more to Victor than people knew, a side that very few ever saw. He had a deep interest in helping others, and his secret was his desire to make a lasting difference in the world of health and well-being. One day, at a prestigious health conference, Victor was invited to speak about the future of health technologies. The atmosphere was electric, filled with passionate doctors, researchers, and health experts. After his talk, as he walked off the stage, he was introduced to Dr. Claire Evans, a pediatrician from a small town known for her work with underprivileged children. Claire had been invited as one of the speakers, though her focus was more on the emotional aspects of child care and pediatrics rather than the technological side. Claire had a warmth about her that was immediately noticeable. She had a way of making you feel like you mattered, no matter who you were or where you came from. Victor, ever the professional, wasn't sure what to expect from their meeting. But as soon as Claire started talking about her experience in pediatrics, Victor couldn't help but be drawn to her. They quickly found common ground in their shared desire to help children and families. She spoke with a passion that matched his own, except her focus was on the immediate, tangible work she did with children who were often forgotten by the healthcare system. Their conversation flowed easily, each one learning from the other. They both shared their visions for the future, discussing how they could improve access to healthcare and make it more inclusive for children everywhere. Claire's perspective was different from the high-tech world Victor was immersed in, but it intrigued him. She spoke of the importance of emotional care for children, something that resonated with Victor despite his scientific and business-oriented background. Though their meeting was short, there was a mutual respect that quickly formed between them. Claire was impressed by Victor's knowledge and commitment to improving health, while Victor appreciated Claire's compassion and dedication to helping children who were most in need. As they parted ways, both felt a curiosity about the other, but neither thought much more of it. They were both busy people after all, and they had their own careers to focus on. But as the days went on, Victor couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to their connection. He thought about their conversation often, wondering if there might be more they could do together, perhaps some collaboration between their fields. A few weeks later, he decided to reach out to Claire, suggesting they meet again. He was eager to explore the possibilities of working with her, not just because of her knowledge, but because he found himself genuinely intrigued by her. This time, when they met again, it was clear that there was something deeper than just professional respect between them. The easy conversation had turned into something more, and both of them were starting to realize that the connection they shared wasn't just about work anymore. However, neither of them were quite ready to acknowledge what was happening. They were both cautious and unsure of what the future held. Would their growing connection lead to something more? Neither knew for sure, but one thing was clear. Their paths were crossing in ways they hadn't expected, and neither could deny the strange pull between them. After their second meeting, Victor and Claire found themselves talking more and more. What had started as a professional relationship quickly deepened into something personal, though neither of them were fully ready to admit it. Victor was used to being in control, making decisions that shaped industries, but with Claire, things felt different. He was drawn to her in ways he didn't understand. She had a natural kindness and warmth that made him feel comfortable, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Claire, on the other hand, was a bit more cautious. She had a full life. Her job as a pediatrician, raising her children, and managing everything that came with being a single mother. Still, there was something about Victor that intrigued her. He was different from anyone she had met before, focused, determined, and somehow comforting. They started meeting regularly to discuss their shared interests in health, And it was during one of these meetings that Claire mentioned something that Victor hadn't expected to hear. She revealed that, a few years ago, she had given birth to quadruplets. She shared how challenging yet rewarding it was to raise them, balancing the demands of her career with the needs of her children. Claire had always been strong and independent, but raising 4 babies on her own had tested her limits. She had learned to rely on her own strength, but there were days when it all felt overwhelming. Victor was taken aback by this revelation. He had always admired Claire's intelligence and professional success, but hearing about her personal life made him realize just how much she had accomplished. It also made him wonder what kind of person she really was behind the professional facade. He had always been driven by success and achievement, but in that moment, he began to see Claire in a new light. She wasn't just a pediatrician. She was a mother, a woman who had faced extraordinary challenges and come out on top. Her strength, her ability to handle the chaos of life, made Victor admire her even more. Claire, on the other hand, didn't immediately connect the dots. She hadn't thought much about the past until now, about how life had brought her to where she was. Raising 4 children had been a whirlwind, and while it had its difficult moments, it also brought joy she had never imagined. But despite all her strength and determination, there was still a part of her that longed for something more. Maybe she wanted companionship, maybe she wanted help, someone to share the load. But the idea of relying on someone else had always seemed like a distant dream. It wasn't until she started talking to Victor more often that she realized just how much she needed someone like him. He wasn't just smart and successful, he was also kind and understanding. As they continued to meet, Claire felt herself starting to trust him more, opening up about her struggles and challenges. Victor listened carefully, never interrupting, never offering advice unless she asked for it. He simply listened, something Claire hadn't experienced in a long time. But despite this growing connection, Claire kept one thing to herself, her deepest secret. While Victor was slowly getting to know her better, she hadn't told him everything about her past. She had never intended to hide anything from him, but some things were just too complicated to share. There was a part of her that was afraid of how Victor might react if he knew the whole truth. Would he still look at her the same way? Would their connection still be the same? As time went on, Claire and Victor's meetings became more frequent. They started to spend time together outside of work, grabbing coffee or visiting parks with her children. Victor found himself growing attached to Claire and her children, though he didn't yet fully understand what that meant for him or her. Still, the sense of connection between them grew stronger each time they met. But there was still something unspoken between them, something neither was ready to face. They both had feelings that were becoming impossible to ignore, but neither one had the courage to take the first step. One evening, as Claire sat in her living room, holding her newborn quadruplets and watching them drift off to sleep, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Victor. They had been texting more often lately, their conversations stretching from work to personal life, and she found herself enjoying these exchanges. But tonight's message was different. It wasn't just a casual check-in or a quick question about a health initiative they were working on. Victor had something important to tell her. His message was short and to the point, but it carried the weight of a heavy truth. We need to talk. It's about something you might not know. Claire's heart skipped a beat as she read those words. She had no idea what he was referring to, but something about the message made her uneasy. She had grown comfortable with Victor's company and found herself trusting him more each day, but this message seemed out of place, something that felt unsettling. A few hours later, Victor arrived at her house. Claire had already put the children to bed, and the quiet of the evening seemed to amplify the tension in the air. Victor sat across from Claire, his face serious. His usual confident demeanor had faded, replaced by an unusual anxiety. Claire couldn't remember ever seeing him like this before, and it made her even more nervous. He hesitated before speaking, clearly unsure of how to break the news. "Claire, there's something I need to tell you," he began. "I know this is going to sound crazy, but I found out something that has to do with us." Claire's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Victor's voice grew softer, almost as if he was talking to himself more than to her. A while ago, you mentioned that you had quadruplets. And when I heard that, something about it stuck with me. I didn't think much of it at first, but then. He paused, collecting his thoughts. I found out that I'm the father of your children. The words hit Claire like a punch to the stomach. Her mind spun, trying to process what Victor had just said. She stared at him, unable to speak for a moment. What are you talking about? She finally managed to ask, her voice shaking. Victor looked at her, his expression filled with both confusion and regret. I don't know how it happened, but it turns out that night we met, years ago, I was with you. I didn't remember, but the results came back. I'm the father of your quadruplets. Claire's head felt like it was spinning. The shock of his words left her speechless. She had never even considered the possibility that Victor could be connected to her children in such a personal way. How could she have not known? How could he not have known? She looked at him, trying to make sense of what he was saying, but it didn't add up. The night they were referring to, years ago, had been a blur for Claire. She remembered meeting someone briefly, but she had never imagined that it would be Victor, someone she now saw as a successful, polished business leader. And yet, here he was, telling her that he was the father of her children. Claire's mind raced with questions. How had they ended up in this situation? She had never expected that one night, years ago, would lead to this kind of revelation. But as she looked at Victor, she saw the same confusion and shock in his eyes. This wasn't something he had planned either. He seemed just as blindsided by the situation as she was. I never knew, Claire said quietly, more to herself than to Victor. I never even knew it was you. I didn't realize. Victor nodded, understanding the complexity of her emotions. I didn't know either, Claire. I swear, I didn't know. But now that I do, I want to make things right. I want to help however I can. Claire's thoughts were a whirlwind. The man sitting before her, who had only recently become a part of her life, was now someone she had to figure out how to trust on a whole new level. This revelation had thrown her world off balance. She had raised her children on her own, believing that she was doing everything for them. But now, Victor had appeared in their lives in a way she had never expected. I don't know what to say, Claire finally replied, her voice barely above a whisper. This is a lot. Victor leaned forward slightly. I know, and I don't expect you to have all the answers right now, but I want to be here for you, and for the kids. I want to do whatever I can to support you. Claire looked at him, seeing him in a completely different light now. This wasn't just a successful businessman anymore. This was a man who was offering to help her, someone who was stepping into her life and the lives of her children in a way that was both overwhelming and unexpected. I don't know where to start, Claire said, her voice filled with uncertainty. But there was something in her heart, a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, this could lead to something good. Victor simply nodded. We'll figure it out together. The next few days were filled with tension and confusion. Claire couldn't shake the feeling that everything she had known about her life had been turned upside down. The idea that Victor, the billionaire health tycoon, was the father of her quadruplets was still hard to believe. She kept replaying the events in her mind, trying to make sense of the pieces that didn't seem to fit. How had they ended up here? She had always believed she was raising her children alone, and now Victor's sudden appearance felt like a disruption to the carefully constructed world she had built for herself. Victor, on the other hand, was trying his best to understand the situation and how he could become involved in their lives. He had spent his career focused on success, and now, in a moment, everything had changed. He had never imagined that his past would catch up with him in such a profound way. He hadn't been prepared to be a father, especially not in the way he had been thrust into it. But, as much as he was overwhelmed by the situation, there was a part of him that wanted to rise to the challenge. They met again, both of them uncertain about how to move forward. Claire had a lot on her plate already, raising quadruplets alone and managing her career. Adding a new person into the mix, especially someone as high-profile as Victor, felt like a huge risk. But deep down, she knew that Victor had a part to play in their children's lives now, and she couldn't ignore that. Victor arrived at Claire's house one afternoon, his usual confident demeanor replaced by an uneasy calm. He could tell that Claire was still processing everything, and he understood her hesitation. He wanted to give her space, but he also wanted to show her that he was willing to take responsibility. "Claire," Victor began, sitting down across from her, "I know this is all a lot to take in. I want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what. I don't expect you to have all the answers, but I'm not going anywhere." Claire looked at him, her expression a mix of surprise and wariness. She had never imagined that she'd be having this conversation with someone like Victor. "I'm not sure what to do with all of this," she said quietly. "This wasn't something I planned for. My life was already complicated enough. Adding you into the picture, I just don't know if I can handle it." Victor nodded. He understood her hesitation. He wasn't expecting her to jump into the idea of having him involved in their lives right away. But he wanted her to know that he was ready, even if she wasn't. "I don't want to rush you into anything," he said, his voice gentle. "But I think we need to talk about how to move forward. Your children, they're my responsibility too now." Claire took a deep breath, processing his words. It wasn't easy to hear. She had spent so long doing everything on her own that the idea of letting someone else into their lives felt like a risk. But there was a part of her that knew Victor wasn't just offering help. He was offering a chance to build something new, to give her children the father they never had. "I never expected this," Claire said, her voice trembling slightly. "I thought I was doing everything right, raising them by myself. I never thought about what would happen if their father showed up one day. And now, here you are." Victor reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. "I can't change the past, Claire," he said softly, "but I can be here for you now. I want to be a part of their lives. I want to be a father to them, even if it's a little late. But I'm willing to take that step." Claire stared at his hand for a moment before looking back up at him. There was sincerity in his eyes, something she hadn't seen before, something that made her believe he was genuine in his desire to help. But the fear still lingered. She didn't know if she was ready to trust him fully. Could she really allow him into her life and into the lives of her children without risking everything she had worked so hard for? Victor seemed to sense her hesitation and gently withdrew his hand. "I understand that this is a lot for you to process. You don't have to make any decisions now, but I want to help however I can. Maybe we can start small, spending some time with the kids, getting to know each other better. I just want to be there." Claire nodded slowly, still unsure but starting to feel that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't as impossible as it seemed. She had spent so long doing everything on her own. But maybe it was time to let someone else in, someone who could offer more than just financial support, someone who could be a father to her children. And maybe even, one day, someone who could be more than just a stranger from her past. For now, they would take it one step at a time, figuring out what it meant to be a family, no matter how unconventional it might seem. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between Claire and Victor began to settle, but the weight of the situation still loomed large over them. Claire had always prided herself on being independent, managing everything in her life with the strength and determination she had developed over the years. But now, with Victor in the picture, everything felt uncertain. She wasn't sure how to integrate him into her life, or if she even wanted to. She had spent so much time alone with her children, raising them on her own, and now the idea of sharing her space, her routines, and her children with someone else felt like a huge leap. Victor, for his part, was eager to help, but he didn't want to push Claire. He understood that this wasn't just about him showing up in their lives. It was about Claire, too. He knew that his sudden appearance had shaken things up, and he didn't want to add to her stress. But as time passed, he couldn't help but feel a growing attachment to the children. He found himself thinking about them, even when he wasn't around. How would they react to him? Would they accept him as their father, or would they see him as a stranger? And more importantly, would Claire ever feel ready to let him be a part of their lives in a meaningful way? It was on one of these quiet afternoons that Victor decided to take the first real step in being involved in their lives. He had noticed how much Claire struggled with the day-to-day demands of raising 4 children. The house was always busy, filled with laughter and chaos, but there were moments when Claire looked exhausted, overwhelmed by the constant need for her attention. He knew that she could use help, even if she wasn't asking for it. So he offered. One afternoon, as Claire was preparing dinner, Victor called to ask if he could come over. "I was thinking," he said, "maybe I could come by and help with the kids for a while. I know it's not easy for you, and I'd like to give you a little break, if that's okay." At first, Claire hesitated. The idea of someone else taking over even a small part of her daily routine was a little unsettling. She had grown used to being the one in control of everything, and the thought of letting go, even just for a little while, was hard to accept. But she could hear the sincerity in Victor's voice, and a small part of her appreciated the offer. Maybe this was the opportunity she needed to breathe for a few hours. "All right," Claire finally said, "I'll let you come over, but just for a bit. I don't want to throw everything off schedule." Victor laughed, and she could hear the warmth in his voice. "I promise I won't mess anything up. Just want to give you some space." When Victor arrived at Claire's house later that day, he was greeted by the usual chaos, the sound of kids laughing, running around, and toys scattered across the floor. Claire, with her usual calm demeanor, was trying to keep everything in order, but it was clear she was worn out. The moment he stepped into the house, Victor noticed how much she was juggling and how difficult it must have been for her to handle it all alone. "Hey, I've got this," Victor said with a smile, trying to lighten the mood. "Why don't you go relax for a bit?" Claire was reluctant at first, but realized she didn't have to be in control of every moment. She watched Victor as he interacted with the kids, how gentle he was with them, how he tried to keep them entertained. It was strange to see him in this role, but it was also kind of comforting. For the first time, Claire allowed herself to step away, retreating to her room for some quiet time. As she sat down, she couldn't help but think about how different this felt. For so long, she had carried the weight of everything herself. Now she was learning to let go, slowly, and it felt oddly freeing. She could hear Victor's voice in the other room, chatting with the children, making them laugh, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like maybe she didn't have to do everything alone. The hours passed, and when Claire returned to the living room, she was surprised to find Victor had managed to organize the kids' toys, help them with their meals, and even calm them down before bedtime. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And for the first time, Claire saw Victor not as a billionaire businessman, but as a father figure, someone who was genuinely trying to help. "You did great," Claire said, smiling. "I didn't expect all of this." Victor chuckled, wiping his hands on his pants. "I didn't realize how much work this was. You're doing an amazing job, Claire." Claire's heart warmed at his words. There was something about Victor's willingness to step in, to do the little things that meant so much. It wasn't about the money or the status. It was about his willingness to be there, to be present in a way that made a real difference in her life. The weeks that followed felt like a slow but steady transformation. Claire found herself starting to rely on Victor more than she had expected. The simple acts of kindness, helping with the children, sharing the household responsibilities, and taking time to listen to her, began to change the dynamic between them. Claire had spent so many years on her own, handling everything herself, that she never realized how much she had been missing the support of another person. It wasn't just about the physical help, but the emotional weight that Victor's presence seemed to ease. At first, it had been hard for Claire to accept help. She was used to doing things on her own, and letting someone else into her life, especially in such an intimate way, was a challenge. But with each passing day, she started to see Victor in a different light. He wasn't just the successful businessman she had met at the conference. He was someone who genuinely cared, who didn't mind getting his hands dirty, and who showed up when he said he would. Victor, for his part, had been trying his best to step up as a father figure to the quadruplets. While it wasn't easy, especially when it came to figuring out how to interact with children he had never known, he was determined. He wasn't just playing the role of a father for show. He was starting to feel an emotional connection to the kids. They were smart, funny, and filled with energy, and as time passed, Victor found himself growing attached to them. One afternoon, as he sat in Claire's living room with the children, he realized just how much he had come to care about them. They had all been running around, playing games and laughing, when one of the children, a little girl named Lily, ran over to him with a drawing she had made. It was a picture of their family, Victor, Claire, and the quadruplets. Lily had drawn him in the picture, and when she handed it to him with a big smile, something inside Victor shifted. "Look, it's our family," Lily exclaimed, her eyes shining with excitement. Victor smiled, his heart softening. "It's beautiful, Lily," he said, looking at the drawing carefully. The small gesture hit him in a way he wasn't prepared for. This wasn't just a temporary situation. He was becoming part of their lives. And as much as he had tried to keep his distance, he could no longer deny the fact that these children were becoming as important to him as they were to Claire. That evening, when Claire returned from work, she saw Victor sitting on the couch, surrounded by the children, laughing and playing. It was a sight that both warmed and confused her. Seeing him so naturally involved in their lives was something she hadn't expected, and part of her felt a sense of relief that perhaps she had made the right choice in letting him get closer. But there was also a part of her that was still hesitant. She didn't know what the future held, and she wasn't ready to open up completely just yet. Still, she couldn't deny that she was starting to feel a bit more hopeful. Victor looked up as she entered the room. "Hey, Claire. We were just looking at Lily's drawing. The kids have been great today." Claire smiled, though there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "I can see that. You've really been stepping in for me." Victor nodded, his smile genuine. "I just want to help. You're doing so much on your own. And if there's anything I can do to make it easier for you, I'm here." His words felt like a promise, and Claire couldn't help but feel a growing sense of gratitude. It wasn't that she had expected him to fix everything, but the simple act of him showing up, day after day, was starting to mean more than she had imagined. The kids, as always, were full of energy. Claire had never seen them so excited to spend time with someone, and she found herself watching Victor with a growing sense of admiration. He was trying, really trying, and she was beginning to see the potential for something deeper between them, not just for the children's sake, but for hers as well. But even as she felt this sense of warmth, Claire still had her walls up. She knew that opening up to Victor, letting him fully into her life, would require more than just casual help around the house. It would mean trusting him completely, and that was something she wasn't sure she could do just yet. The idea of relying on someone else for emotional support was a big step, especially when she had spent so many years doing everything on her own. For now, though, she allowed herself to enjoy the moments of peace that Victor had helped create. She watched him interact with the kids, saw the way they looked at him with trust and affection, and realized that maybe, just maybe, there was a future where they could all be a family. It wasn't going to happen overnight, but for the first time in a long time, Claire was starting to believe that it was possible. And that belief was enough to give her the courage to take the next step. As the days passed, Claire began to notice a subtle shift in her feelings. She had always been fiercely independent, doing everything for her children, trying to balance work and family without asking for help. But now, with Victor in the picture, something was changing. It wasn't just the physical help he was offering, though that was undoubtedly a relief. It was his presence, his willingness to be there, and the way he genuinely wanted to be a part of their lives. She could see how much the kids had started to warm to him. They were laughing more, asking for him when they needed help, and sharing little moments of their day with him as if he had always been there. But for Claire, it wasn't so simple. She couldn't just turn off the walls she had built around herself over the years. She had been through so much on her own, raised her children without anyone's help, and trusted only herself. Now, with Victor's involvement, she was unsure of how to navigate the path forward. Could she really open herself up to him? Could she trust him to be a part of their family, without risking everything she had worked so hard to build? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Claire sat outside on her porch, watching the children play in the yard. Victor was sitting next to her, quietly observing the scene. For a moment, there was silence between them, but it wasn't an uncomfortable one. It felt peaceful, almost like they had settled into a new routine together, one that didn't require words to understand. "You know," Claire said, breaking the silence, "I never thought this would be how things turned out." Victor turned to her, his gaze soft. "What do you mean?" She looked out at the kids, who were running around, giggling and chasing each other. "I never imagined having help. I never imagined someone else stepping in and being here, for me and for them." She paused, taking a deep breath. "It's not easy for me to let go. I've done everything myself for so long." Victor nodded, understanding. "I get it. I can't imagine what it's been like for you, but I'm not trying to take over or make you feel like you can't handle things. I just want to help. I want to be there for you and the kids." Claire turned to him, her eyes filled with a mix of uncertainty and hope. "I don't know if I can trust anyone to be a part of our lives like this. It's always been just me and the kids. We've built this little world, and I've always protected them. It's hard to imagine anyone else fitting into that." Victor's voice was gentle but sincere. "I'm not asking you to give up control, Claire. I'm just offering to be a part of it, to be there when you need me, to support you if you'll let me." There was something about the way he said it, something that made Claire feel like maybe, just maybe, she could trust him. It wasn't about giving up control or letting go of her independence. It was about allowing herself to accept help. Maybe, just maybe, she could let herself believe that she wasn't in this alone anymore. The kids, who had been playing near the porch, suddenly ran up to them, giggling as they stopped in front of Victor. "Uncle Victor," one of them shouted, and the others followed suit, calling him by the same title. Victor smiled, surprised by the sudden affection, but it warmed his heart. Claire watched the interaction, her gaze softening. For the first time in a long while, she saw her children with a different perspective. They weren't just her responsibility anymore. They were part of something bigger, something that included Victor now. And maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. As the night drew on, and the children settled into bed, Claire found herself reflecting on the evening. She had been so focused on keeping her walls up, so afraid of what letting someone else in might mean. But now she saw that there was room for someone like Victor in their lives. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be challenges ahead, but she was starting to believe that maybe she didn't have to do everything alone. She walked into the living room, where Victor was sitting, reading a book. She paused for a moment, taking in the sight of him. This man who had unexpectedly become such an important part of their lives. He wasn't perfect, and neither was she. But they were both trying, and for the first time, Claire felt like maybe they were on the right path. "Victor," she said softly, "I'm not sure where this is going, but I'm willing to see what happens. I'm willing to try, if you are." Victor looked up from his book, his eyes meeting hers. There was a hint of surprise in his expression, but it quickly softened into a smile. "I'm in, Claire. I want to try, too, whatever it takes." And in that moment, Claire felt a sense of relief wash over her. Maybe things weren't perfect. Maybe they weren't even close to figuring everything out, but they were taking steps forward, together. And for now, that was enough. As the weeks turned into months, Victor and Claire's relationship slowly evolved into something more comfortable, more natural. The tension that had once filled the air between them had melted away, replaced by a sense of mutual understanding and respect. Claire had come to rely on Victor not just for help with the kids, but for emotional support as well. She found herself opening up more, sharing her fears and hopes, things she hadn't spoken aloud in years. And Victor, for his part, had become deeply involved in their lives. He didn't just show up when things were difficult. He was there every day, playing with the kids, helping with meals, and even taking time to learn about parenting, something he had never expected to do. Victor's bond with the children grew stronger, and they started to look at him as someone they could rely on. It was a gradual process, but each day brought new moments of connection. He wasn't just the wealthy businessman who had unexpectedly become a father figure. He was the person who laughed with them, comforted them when they were sad, and taught them new things. He had become a part of their world, and the kids loved him for it. Claire watched all of this, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and gratitude. She had once feared that letting Victor into their lives would be a mistake, but now she couldn't imagine things any other way. It wasn't always easy, of course. There were days when Claire felt overwhelmed, moments when she questioned if she was making the right choices. It was hard to let go of the control she had held for so long. There were still times when she felt like the weight of it all rested on her shoulders, but those moments became fewer as she allowed Victor to be more involved. It wasn't about giving up control. It was about sharing the responsibilities of raising their family. And little by little, Claire was beginning to realize that she didn't have to carry everything alone. One evening, as the children went to bed, Claire and Victor found themselves alone in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner. There was a comfortable silence between them as they worked side by side, washing dishes and putting away the leftovers. Claire glanced at Victor, noticing the way his sleeves were rolled up, his hands moving with purpose as he cleaned. He looked at ease in the kitchen, as if he had always been there. She couldn't help but smile, thinking about how far they had come since that first meeting at the health conference. "Victor," she said, breaking the silence, "thank you for everything. I don't know if I said it enough, but I appreciate you being here. For the kids, for me." Victor looked up, a soft smile tugging at his lips. "You don't have to thank me, Claire. I'm here because I want to be. I want to be part of this family. And it's been one of the most fulfilling things I've ever done." Claire's heart fluttered at his words. She had never imagined that someone like Victor, someone so successful, so different from her, could feel this way. She had always been afraid of letting him into their world, but now it felt like he was exactly what they had needed all along. Not just as a father figure for the kids, but as someone who truly cared for her as well. As they finished cleaning, Victor turned to her. "I know we're not perfect," he said softly, "but I think we're doing okay. We're building something real here together." Claire nodded, her eyes meeting his. "I agree. I never thought it would be possible, but maybe this is what we needed. Maybe this is where we're supposed to be." For the first time, Claire allowed herself to truly believe that things were changing for the better. She no longer feared the unknown. With Victor by her side, she felt like they were building something strong, something worth fighting for. There were still challenges ahead, but they no longer felt insurmountable. They were a team now, and together they could face whatever came their way. As they walked into the living room, Victor gently put his arm around Claire's shoulders, and she rested her head against his. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. In that moment, Claire realized that this was the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter that wasn't defined by fear or uncertainty, but by trust, love, and the willingness to embrace the unexpected. They didn't have all the answers, but they didn't need to. What mattered was that they were together, building a life, one step at a time. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, Claire felt ready to face it, knowing that she wasn't alone anymore. And that was all she needed.